Good afternoon, everyone. It is noon, and so we're going to get started on our Lunch and Learn today. This is our last Lunch and Learn of this kind of season and session of Lunch and Learns. We're going to take a break for Christmas and New Year's, and then on your tables is just an 8.5 by 11 handout with some of the dates for next year. We'll have those formal cards printed for that first Lunch and Learn next year. But Todd Mulliken is going to lead us off in January, and we're going to be talking about understanding how to increase forgiveness and release resentments. And then there's just a lot of great Lunch and Learns that are going to follow that. I want to particularly draw out the January 18th Lunch and Learn. Mike Max is a Wooddailer. He's been here for almost 30 years at Wooddale Church, and he's been covering sports for WCCO, radio, and TV over those years. And he's going to come and do a Lunch and Learn on just some of his favorite stories from covering Minnesota sports over the past 3 decades, which should be a super easy invitation for you. And if you want to put a circle on that day, we're also buying lunch for anyone who comes that day, all right? So January 18th, and all we're going to ask for that day is pre-register for that day so that we know how much lunch to buy and if we know if this room's going to fit us. So I told Dale we have 12 people coming today, and so thank you for being more than 12 people today. Way to go. And our speaker today and our speakers today are no stranger whatsoever to Wooddale Church. We have been gifted as a church to have Dale and Marcia Hummel as our pastor and his wife here for the past over 10 years now. And in those years, Wooddale Church has seen God do just beautiful things here, near, and far. The room that we're in today in this ministry is really an overflow of kind of the visionary pastor that God gave us in Dale. He put together something with our leadership team called Legacy of Hope, which is a campaign to make a difference in our own backyard as well as overseas. And God has been using the Family Resource Initiative to make incredible strides in our community. Right across from you is a coat closet that at the beginning of this session of Lunch and Learns didn't exist. And Kathy Gerthofer, our associate director, is standing at the door back there, just told me that we've served over 76 families and 210 coats have walked out of there, and just beautiful, beautiful things happening there. And every week there are lives and marriages that are being changed through our Re-Engaged Marriage Ministry, through Financial Peace University, through counseling, through just a variety of ministries, and many of those ministries are ministries that existed in our care ministries ahead of time, but there's just expansion happening all around here. And so thanks for being here, and our speakers are terrific. But Dale and Marcia are married to each other and have been for, I'm not even going to tell you how many years. It's been a lot of years. He'll tell you how many years, all right? They have 4 grandchildren. And they're incredible grandparents, and they're going to be back here in February talking about intentional grandparenting. So those of you who are grandparents in the room, make sure you mark that date on your calendar as well. I could go on, but you know them, most of you. So would you give an incredible welcome to our pastor?
Good afternoon, everybody. Marcia and I, we're going to sit, since you're all sitting. All right, it makes it a little bit more informal that way. I got my little red tea here. Just a couple of things before we get started. I wasn't exactly sure who was going to be in the room, so it's hard to plan when you're not exactly sure. And as I'm looking around the room, I'm realizing there are a lot of veterans in this room who probably could do a better job than us talking about marriage, right? Some of you are married way longer than we have, and you have a lot more wisdom and advice to pass on. So please don't take this, what we're going to share with you, as any kind of an insult or we know better, all right? Because we're still on the journey of marriage. Mark and I have been married 44 years. She was 12 when we got married. She was 13. But anyway, we got married young. I was 19 when we got married, right? And so we kind of grew up together, is what people like to say. And I've shared this in other venues before. I owe so much to the Lord. Obviously, my whole life belongs to Him, but also for just the wonderful gifts that He's given to me. And the greatest gift, other than my salvation, and that's infinitely incomparable. You can't compare anything to it. But the next greatest gift that God gave to me is Marcia. And if you've read my book, Reset, you know a little bit more about my story. And if it hadn't been for Marcia, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I wouldn't be in the ministry today. So I was just greatly blessed to meet her on the campus of what was known, I have to get this thing out of the way, on the campus of what used to be known as St. Paul Bible College, and now known as Crown College. So I got a really good, not only education there, but a great relationship out of it. So I'm very blessed that way. Some of the things that we'll share with you today, you might find helpful in your own relationship, and if so, I'm very happy for that. Some of the things we're going to share today, you already know, and maybe we're just going to remind you, and it'll serve to help you when you're counseling friends or talking to your married children, to be able to kind of encourage them, maybe with some of these insights as well. So take it however it applies, right? If it doesn't directly apply to you, think about who you might share it with at some point. And then I think a little bit later on we'll have a time for question and answers, and you can ask Marcia any question you want about me, and then she'll be honest, all right? So we chose 5 topics. We'll see if we get through them or not to talk to you about. And they're not the typical topics that you hear when people talk about marriage. But we thought, you already know a lot about issues like communication, etc. So we thought we'd talk about maybe some different ways of thinking about our marriage relationship. So Marcia's going to start us out here and talk about the priority, making marriage a priority no matter what age you are, whether you're young, in the middle, or at the end, of your family's, your kids are gone, it's just you and your spouse. How do you keep marriage a priority? Go ahead.
Well, one of the important reasons that God designed marriage is found for us in Malachi 2:15. It says, "Didn't the Lord make you one with your wife? And what does God want? Godly children from your union." And I think that one of the greatest gifts that we can give to our children and our grandchildren, whether they're young or grown, is first of all modeling living, growing faith in Jesus Christ and helping them understand and see what being a follower of Jesus really looks like. But then secondly, modeling a strong, healthy marriage for them to see. It's so important. And marriage is actually meant to be a picture of our relationship with Christ and all that He's done for us. So our kids need to see an example of what true love is, and that it's not a feeling, as our culture, promotes. Love, first of all, of course, is commitment. Being committed to one another for life. And Jesus is our example in His promise that He gave us that He'd never leave us or forsake us. And love is a commitment. Love is sacrifice. We have to sacrifice for each other in marriage. And, of course, Jesus is our example again of being the ultimate sacrifice, giving His life for us when He died on the cross to save us. And then not only is love commitment, sacrifice, but it's also truth. And Jesus always tells us the truth about ourselves, about this world, about who He is. And Jesus lives the truth for us. And in marriage, it's so important that we also live the truth. And in our culture today as parents, I think it's such a temptation to spend so much energy on our kids and their activities. And the thinking is you want your kids to have the very best opportunities, live in a nice home, in a great neighborhood, all the sports and the best education and their friends and fun. But all those things combined together don't even come close in importance to mom and dad providing a healthy home environment through their example of loving God and putting Him first in their lives above all those activities, and then by truly loving each other. And I think one of the big things we have to deal with today is schedules. I think it's really important that families and couples in a marriage sit down and talk about our schedules. You know, we got to make sure that our priorities are right, that we have time both as families and as individuals, time for the Lord, and then time for your spouse, and not just doing the activities and doing the business of life, but time to enjoy each other apart from all those responsibilities and pressures in life. And you're probably going to have to schedule it to take that time. And then having really solid time with our kids. Again, not just in the activities, but making sure you take the time, we're teaching them character and values, and also teaching our kids to manage their schedules and make sure that we know how and when to say no to certain activities when we need to, so we can keep the important things as the priority.
So, you know, I'm looking around the room, and I'm assuming most of you have already raised your kids. And some of you still may have kids at home. How many of you are grandparents? All right, so a lot of grandparents in the room. And we have some things to share about that that we're actually learning as grandparents. But, you know, one of the things I just want to remind all of us is, you know, we have 3 adult children. 2 of them are married. We have 4 grandkids. Is that we still continue to play a role in their lives, not just by what we say, but by what we do. And so there's a sense for those of us who are married and older that we have a responsibility to continually send a message to our adult children, and now, in our case, to our grandchildren, that marriage is really important, that marriage is a priority. Because I think one of the great challenges that we're seeing in our culture today is that marriage is, you know, our marriages are bowing to other issues that Marcia mentioned that seem to have come, you know, into greater priority. A, sports. B, education and grades. C, success, making money. You know, D, looking good and having your act all together. And what we see happen, and I've seen this happen in my ministry years, and I know Brian and other pastors could speak to this as well, is that what happens is the marriage erodes because it's all about prioritizing the wrong things. Not that your kids aren't important, they are. Not that the grandkids are unimportant, they are important. But for their sake, you have to keep marriage, you know, right up there next to your relationship with God. You know, so oftentimes you think of the pyramid, God, then spouse. And I think that easily can, you know, that spouse role can easily drop down several layers with all the other issues that begin to rise up. And so it's a battle to keep your marriage first. I watch our kids, and I love my kids dearly. Both of us love our kids dearly. But I watch my daughter, who's married to a very successful physician in Texas. They have 2 grandkids. We're thankful they're in a Christian school, a classical Christian school. We have to learn Latin, and I mean, the responsibilities are huge. I would have never survived that kind of school. I just want you to know that. My son, Ben, he's getting his doctorate tomorrow from Bethel in education. He's the head of a school. His wife has a part-time job that seems more like a full-time job. And they have, you know, adolescent kids. And Marcia and I just step back sometimes and we watch the pace that they live their lives at. And it worries us, it concerns us. And we'll talk about this in a grandparent session. How do you speak into that without getting, you know, yourself in trouble? But we have to do a lot behind the scenes. And a lot of what we do behind the scenes is we pray a lot behind the scenes for them. And then we try our best to model a lot for them behind the scenes of how significant and important your marriage is. And you can't sacrifice your marriage for the kids. You love your kids, absolutely, but your spouse has to be more important, listen, more important than your kids for your kids' sake, right? We try our best to model for them the importance of romance, keeping that alive in the marriage. I can't tell you over the years, and again, Brian, Richard, other pastors could speak into this. I can't tell you how many couples I've counseled over the years who just the romance died in their marriage because they didn't keep it a priority. And here's what happens, when, and maybe you've experienced this, that when the kids leave home, all of a sudden you have empty nesters that have no clue how to live with each other, because it was always about the kids. It was always about the job. It was always about whatever. So you and I have to find a way to keep modeling in front of our children how joyful it is to be married, how wonderful it is to have your spouse in your life, how excited you are to be able to spend time together. I mean, they need to see and hear that continuously, so that at least in the back of their mind it registers, man, we need to make our marriage a priority as well. So some of the things that Marcia and I have done to try to keep it a priority, and we continue to do this, and it was an older mentor of ours that really instilled this into us, is we've always tried to keep dating in our relationship. When I first started the ministry, a man by the name of Stephen Wolford, he was a godly British pastor. He led Billy Graham into the deeper life, and I had the privilege of getting pretty close to him. He had his British accent, and he was a very busy man. He was on TV back in the I think in the 60s. He was traveling all over the place, but he would always say this. He would say, Dale, in his British accent. He would say, brother, Sunday is a King's Day. Monday is a Queen's Day, which meant belongs to my wife. And he lived that out. And I never forgot that. And so throughout our ministry and in all the busyness of things, I've always tried to make sure there's a Queen's Day. There's a day that's just for Marcia and for me, to focus on each other and to focus on our relationship. And, there have been times, and life is busy at times, when Queen's Day didn't happen, but we've always been quick to make up for it later on. And so just, whether you're 20 or whether you're 60 or whether you're 80, keep dating your spouse, right? And keep that relationship alive, not just for the sake of the two of you, but for your kids, whether they're young or they're adult kids watching. And also for your grandkids. I mean, I've already been praying for my grandchildren and who they're going to marry someday. Our oldest grandchild, Catalina, is 15 now, and it just scares me. I'm not even her dad. I am twice her dad. I am the grandfather, all right? I'd be careful of that. But, and I just can't believe she's going to start dating already. It seemed like last time I saw her, I was holding her in my arms. I want to make sure that when she looks at Grandma and Grandpa, that she sees two people who really love each other. Don't put up with each other, but really love each other. I want her to see that I cherish my wife and that she cherishes me, so that when she starts thinking about who am I going to marry someday, she doesn't just think about her parents, though that's important. I want her to think about them, obviously, but they're going 100 miles an hour. I also want them to think about us and just realizing, here's a long-term example of what it should be like. So that's been something that's important for us. Another thing we've tried to do over our marriage is practice appropriate affection for each other in front of our kids and our grandkids. My grandkids just laugh at me sometimes. By the way, I'll treat Marcia, putting my arm around her, I'll pick her up and carry over the threshold, so to speak, or I'll just do things that are fun, because I want them to see that marriage is fun. I want them to see that this is my best friend, because I want them to have fun. I want them to have a best friend. I want to remind my adult kids, hey, call time out sometime and just have some fun. It's okay to laugh with each other. It's okay to, to act like you're still kids. Just falling in love. Those are the little things that we don't think matter, but they do. That's what drew us to each other, remember? And how quickly it can be dissipated by all the other kinds of things that happen. We've also, in our marriage, we tried to model the fact that it's important to give each other space. I remember when we were first married, when you're a young family, you have what's called a pit hour. You know what the pit hour is? That's when kids come home from school, you come home from work. If your spouse works, they come home from work, and it's you just hope you can make it through dinner. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's the pit hour, okay? And it's stressful. Marriage is stressful. And this is back in California many years ago, and I had a stress relief. I would go running with some friends. And that was kind of, I would go hang out, I'd run with them, and I came home one day, and Marcia looked at me, she says, you have your outlet, I have none. Right? I have all the stuff I do for church, then I have the kids, because they were little at that time, and then there's dinner, and then I try to get to bed, and I'm trying to take care of you. I need an outlet too. And so we made an agreement. She would go out running earlier in the morning. I'd make sure I was still home with the kids. And then she ended up running with someone who became her best friend, Cheryl Ann. And it's important that I made sure she had space, because we need her individuality as well. And so part of making your marriage a priority is giving that gift to each other, that gift of space. And again, modeling that for your kids and for your own grandkids. And even in your lives today, how are you doing about giving each other space to be who God created you to be uniquely? We also were careful with our arguments. And we had arguments. I'm Dutch. What do you expect, right? And Marcia's a hard-nosed Norwegian. So, you put that together and it can be explosive. But what's funny to us is our adult kids our in-law kids have said to us, particularly one of them has said to us, you guys are saying to their spouses, to Ben and Bethany, you guys are lucky. You grew up in a home where you never saw your parents argue. And Marcia and I, when we heard that, we just laughed. We just thought, we did argue. But my own kids say we really never saw that, which just shocks me, right? But we tried to make sure that any of those serious discussions we had in private, right? Not to hide anything from our kids and make them think our lives are perfect, but we didn't want to involve them in issues they didn't need to be involved in. We wanted to handle those things in other kinds of ways. Another way of making marriage a priority is how do you talk about each other? Boy, I could go on this for about another hour, and I won't. We live in a culture of just sarcasm. It's rampant. It's on all the TV sitcoms. I mean, it's just everywhere you go. And, it's an unhealthy thing for your kids, whether they're adult kids or your grandkids, to hear you speak about each other in ways that are belittling or cutting down and then saying, well, I'm just being sarcastic. Words hurt, don't they? So how can I use my words to always speak well of my spouse, to lift them up? And there's been plenty of times when Marcia's had to kind of take me aside and say, hey, the way you said that, it hurt me. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know what the problem with that is. But Marcia's not another guy, right? I have to be careful I don't treat her like she's one of the guys and speak to her in that tone of voice or with that kind of humor. This is my wife. This is God's gift to me. So I want to speak words that lift her up and encourage her, and modeling that continuously. And then, I've already alluded to this, but, as men, we need to show our daughters, if we have daughters, or our granddaughters, right? We need to show them what a gentleman is like by how we speak and how we behave. Why is that? Because inevitably, she's going to be looking for someone like her dad. And so I want to make sure I give her a positive role model that reflects who her father, who she should seek out in marriage. And same, would be for a wife, for the wife. Model for the son the kind of woman, right, that you would hope he would marry someday. But because if our kids don't have those models, they don't know what to look for. Which again is why we're in the crisis that we're in our nation today. If we're not modeling for our kids and our grandkids or even our great-grandkids what it means to be a gentleman, what it means to be a true lady, then we leave them at a deficit. What are they going to look for as a result of that? And I guess the last thing, and then we'll move on to the next one, is the importance of assurance. I remember when our son Ben came home from, was it first grade or kindergarten? First grade, and we were living in Ohio, and he looked at me, very serious. He said with real nervousness, he said, "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" Oh my goodness, you could have plunged a knife through my chest. I'm like, where's that coming from? And Ben told me about his little friend who had just said to him that his mom and dad got divorced. So it's like I had to put my arm around him and I had to assure him, Mom and Dad love each other. We're here for you. Now, if you've been through a divorce, you understand the pain of that, and I'm not here to make you feel bad about that. I always tell people who are divorced, okay, the past is over, let's make this work. But the point is, nothing helps our children more, nothing helps our marriage more than when we have assurance, when we give assurance. And longevity, longevity adds that assurance, doesn't it? All right, so that's a little bit on the priority of marriage. Marcia, you want to hit the next one, how we think about our spouse?
Yeah, that's a really important area, our thoughts. And the erosion of any marriage really begins in the mind. Negative thoughts can start with little things that might irritate us, but they can quickly grow. And then you can start thinking thoughts like, well, my spouse doesn't meet my needs, or my spouse doesn't value what I do, or maybe he or she doesn't compare to so-and-so, and you look and see how attentive this person is to their spouse. And once you start thinking those thoughts, it's really getting into some dangerous territory, because the more we feed negative thoughts, the more they start to dominate our mind, and then those negative thoughts kind of overcome everything else. 2 Corinthians 10:5 tells us to take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And an example of that would be, so Dale and I, like he said, we've been married 44 years, and in those 44 years, I still have not convinced him that it's really important to put the toilet seat lid down every time.
So
he's about at 50%.
I haven't proved way me on that
50%.
thing. Whatever.
But anyway, when I see that, I have a choice, right, of what I'm going to think. I can either start to think, dwell on what he didn't do, or I can use that to trigger a thought. And I decided just a couple weeks ago when I was working on this, okay? So now every time I see it, I think, all right, he forgot to put the toilet seat down, but he gives me the most awesome back rubs. And just letting that be a trigger for me to think of the positive things, all the good things that he does. And so we have a choice of where we're going to let our mind go and dwell. Is it going to be that negative thing, or is it going to be the positive things? How does God want me to think about my spouse in every situation? He wants me to see him through eyes of love and with words of encouragement, because that actually brings out the best in your spouse. And I thought about, how does God see me? Even with my failures, all my faults, God always sees me through his eyes of love. And that's how he wants us to look at each other. There's so many verses in the Bible that speak to our thoughts. Like Proverbs 23:7, it says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Colossians 3:2 says, set your mind on things above, not on earthly things. Philippians 4:8, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. And then Romans 12:2, it says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. So for the most part, your marriage is what you want it to be. The thoughts you think about your spouse and the energy and prayers you invest in your relationship will largely determine the health and satisfaction of your marriage. And so it's always a good question to ask yourself, what am I contributing toward making a healthy marriage? Good.
So I've done a lot of work in the area of the mind because of my own battle with my own mind. I have OCD. Most of you know that. And mine's more on the severe side of things. So I have to work really hard with how I think because my OCD is rumination. And what we know about the human mind, I've taught on this before, is that the human mind, every human mind, drifts toward the negative. And so scientists and social scientists have been trying to figure out, why is that? Why is it every human being on earth, why is it our proclivity is to drift toward negative things? And it used to be said, and some people still say, it's because of evolution and, predators, right? You always kind of look over your back who's out for you. I think the real reason why our minds drift to the negative is because of sin nature and what happened in the garden a long time ago, right? We just slip into evil. We just slip into what is wrong. Even after we become a believer in Christ, we still have the natural disposition to think on the dark or negative side of things, okay? You bring that into a marriage relationship. You bring that into children and grandchildren. You bring that into busy schedules and unrest in the world and in society, and the dominant spirit of America today. I just read this in an article today. And this is by people who aren't believers saying this, the dominant attitude and mood in America today is gloom. So you take all that negativity, you take what social media knows, that you and I feed on negative things more than positive things. That's why there's a steady stream of negativity coming at us day in and day out, okay? See, they're smart enough to know that. That's how they keep you hooked. They keep you hooked on anxiety and being stressed out about things. So think about all of that in your life. My goodness, what a challenge it is then to discipline your mind, as Marcia's mentioning, to stay focused on the positive, to stay focused on what is good and what is right. Philippians 4:8, think, Paul says, think on these things. Romans chapter 12, what does Paul say? Renew your mind, right? Change your mind. And what Paul's talking about there is a spiritual form of what scientists call neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the ability for you and I, it's a gift really from God, it's the ability from you and I to literally change our brains. And one of the ways we change our brains, this is what I learned through my OCD, is by what we choose to think about. If you think negatively all the time, okay, it's like you build literal grooves, little highways in your brain, in your gray matter, that everything kind of, all the signals travel down that, and you get stuck in the rut. You have to get out of that rut, and that takes hard work. I wish, we're going to the gym later on, this is our date day, we're going to the gym later on and work out. All right? I wish I didn't have to actually go to the gym and work out. I wish I could drive by the gym and just get a workout. Wouldn't that be awesome? You drive by 5 times a day and you'd just be so fit. I've actually got to go in there and I've got to exercise. I don't always feel like to do it, but I have to discipline myself. You have to discipline yourself to think differently. You have to discipline yourself to say, I'm going to think positively. I'm going to think good thoughts, right thoughts. And the person we need to think most positively, the person we need to have the best thoughts about is our spouse. And if your kids and grandkids and your couple friends see you thinking that way, because what we think influences our what? Our behavior. And it influences our verbiage. So if I think that way, if I practice that, it'll be transforming, and they'll see it, right? And I'm now modeling for them. Then people look at you and go, Mom, Dad, how do you do that? Or your couple friends, well, how do you do that? And then you are able to share, I choose to think the right thoughts. I could easily think negative thoughts, but I choose to think the right thoughts. I grew up in a home that was very negative. It has been, and on top of that OCD, it's been a hard work for me to be positive in my thinking and positive in my words. And I'm still working on it. So I'm guessing if there's anything that you hear today, this may be the most important thing, what we just talked about. How do you speak about each other? How do you refer to each other in front of your kids and your grandkids? How do you talk to each other? How do you lift each other up? What if you were to try for just 1 week to only say positive things to and about your spouse? And you put a big jar in the room, and every time you say something negative, $20 has to go in the jar. Wow. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? Just a thought. All right, just a thought. All right, let's move on. Third conversation. Let's talk a little bit about what I call establishing, patrolling, and repairing boundaries. Establishing, patrolling, and repairing boundaries. This has been a really important part of our marriage. And I don't care how young you are, how old you are. Protecting your marriage is really important. I think I can say it in this group and not offend anybody. And you know, when you hear it said, well, I'm just going to say it. If I get in trouble, so what? All right? All right. For men and women, the largest sexual organ in your body is your brain. And I want you to remember that. Because it doesn't matter whether you're 20 and hormones are flowing or you're 80. As long as you have a brain. In a culture that we live in that's very visual, that's very emotional, that's very sensual, all right, it can become an issue. And it ruins so many marriages, even Christian marriages. So that's why when we were talking about the mind, right, it's not only that I think about positive things about my spouse, I just need to keep my mind focused on things that are positive, period. Because all those inlets from the culture, whether it's through movies, videos, conversations, the internet, social media, what I see, all those things feed into that organ up there, right? And have an effect on it, and it has an effect then on how I think about my spouse, myself, or on others. And I don't know about you, but it's hard work these days to keep the filters up and to protect the mind from the assault that the world has. In the Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 15, I love this. He says, catch all the foxes, those little foxes, before they ruin the vineyard of love, for the grapevines are blossoming. I love that picture. That the vineyards, the grape blossoms were hanging low, and these little foxes would come up and would bite them off and would ruin the crop. And so they had these little watchtowers they would build in the vineyard, and day and night somebody would be in that watchtower, and they would have lit torches around the vineyard looking for the little foxes. You had to pay attention because the little foxes were coming out every night to see if you were there or not. And so, you know, the enemy wants to destroy our marriages, not just your marriage, your kids' marriage, if your kids are married, your grandkids. So I have to make sure that I build, that I patrol, and I repair boundaries in my relationship. So let me give you an example here. I wouldn't let you be here today without my artwork, all right? So I want you to imagine square, okay? And I want you to imagine this is a fence, okay? When Marcia and I lived in Illinois, we had a yard that we fenced in because we had a dog, all right, a little dog, and then when our kids were really little, we also had a fenced-in yard. And what we said to our kids and to our dog, and sometimes our dog listened better than our kids, is that this is ours or yours, or this belongs to us, okay? Everything out here, that's not ours. It doesn't belong to us. And in fact, it's dangerous out there. Things can happen out there that I can't control because it's not in my yard. So I need you to build, I need you to build boundaries, and I need you to live in those boundaries. So, what do you name those boundaries? And I jotted down a couple of things. For instance, there are I'll call this moral boundaries, right? Of what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, what's clean, what's unclean, what's pure, what's impure. We have our moral boundaries. So hopefully in your marriage, you and your spouse have moral boundaries that you observe, okay? Hopefully if you have kids, grandkids, you talk to them about moral values, all right, that you observe, okay? I'm going to add one here. I'm going to call it media boundaries. Since the mind is so susceptible, I've got to be careful that I'm not letting a immoral media feed into the minds, in my mind or my wife's mind or my children's mind when they're still at home in our boundaries. Another one I wrote down there is trust and honesty. The boundary of trust and honesty. We're just going to be honest with each other, no matter how painful or hurtful it might be. because we don't want to lie. We don't want to kind of smooth over things because we're afraid we'll get in trouble if we're just really honest about what has been said or what has been done. And then we have another boundary we've had in our marriage, which we call mutual consent. Mutual consent. That there are certain things that I may feel comfortable with, but my spouse is uncomfortable with. So I'm going to make sure that I don't just head out because I'm happy with it. If she disagrees with it, or it's the other way around, I disagree with it, then I respect the person, the spouse who's struggling with it. Because we don't want to do anything that we're not mutually satisfied with. So Marcia and I have had in our marriage, especially over the years, an agreement that I don't go out to lunch or dinner with females alone. And Marcia doesn't go out to lunch or dinner or whatever with males alone. Not because I don't trust her or she doesn't trust me or that person, but why set ourselves up in a situation where a relationship could form with that other person, right? That becomes emotional. You know how that works, right? You and your spouse, your spouse knows you better than anybody else. You don't put the toilet seat up, all right? You squeeze the toothpaste in the middle. Or, you act this way or look this way or whatever, okay? But that other person out there, they may only see you professionally, and especially as pastors. We do a good job of looking like we're caring and loving and just, true men of God or a true, woman of God. But we have our faults. But if you don't expose those faults to each other, what happens is you get this ideal view of that person that, oh, man, I wish I was married to that person, right? Oh, that person rubbed my back the right way, not physically but emotionally, whatever. And an emotional attraction starts. And every affair begins in an emotional attraction. So we just built boundaries that said we're just not going to make ourselves susceptible to that. We're just not going to let it go there. We're going to keep these hard and fast as best as we can. Now, I understand for those of you in secular work, et cetera, or have been in secular work, that may be harder to do. But there's all kinds of ways that you can make sure that stays in a safe place. So what we said is, this is where we live. We don't live out there. We have to make sure our boundaries are in place, so let's agree on our boundaries. Number two, we want to patrol those boundaries regularly, which simply means, hey, how are we doing in our boundaries, right? There's accountability here. And then if we mess up on a boundary, let's say, we fell into viewing something we shouldn't view, seeing something we shouldn't see. Let's be honest about it. Remember, trust and honesty. And let's go and repair that boundary and keep it healthy. The classic example is a man after God's own heart, David. If a man after God's own heart can mess this up, any of us can, right? What did David do? David went out on his veranda one day, right? Which evidently was very close to his, to the edge of the boundaries, right? And he looked out and he saw Bathsheba. She was in her yard, right? And that whole story, I don't have time to explain it. It's not as, a lot of people want to blame Bathsheba. She was not to blame. You have to go and understand the culture of the day. What does David do? He doesn't keep his eyes in his own boundaries. He lets his eyes trail off into that boundary. And what did David decide to do? I'm going to go out of bounds and bring her home. And look what it led to. Just ruined his family, ruined Israel, really, as a result of that. So the importance of having good and healthy and strong boundaries cannot be overestimated. And prayer to protect that marriage. And again, it doesn't matter how young or how old you are. It does not matter. Adultery happens with older married couples, who've been married a long time. Pornography is a problem in people who've been married a long time. All those things can happen if we don't ensure and keep these things. Did you want to add anything to that? All right. That's the problem when people teach me because, I'm just used to opening my mouth and going on. And Marcia has a lot to add. So I think I'm going to stop here because you guys have a session coming up on forgiveness. We're going to talk about that, but I think Todd will do great with that. So any questions you'd like to ask? How do you do this, Brian? Okay.
You guys can share together one, and just so people online can hear, if you have a Who's got questions? Marley?
And who's it for?
For both of you, but I'm wondering if the two of you together have ever thought about writing a book on what you just talked about. Because it's, even though it's basic and we should all know it, I think it's so good and helpful. I think it would be great. You guys would be a great team. Anyway, have you ever thought of that?
Have we ever thought about that?
I think so.
Is there a publisher in the room?
So, you know, and I guess that'd be one of those things that we could talk about as something we could do together, you know, after we kind of switch roles a little bit.
For those
So
who
thank
didn't
you. It's
hear,
a good
she
idea.
asked if they had ever thought about writing a book on this. So, yep. All right. Right up here. Here, we're going to make sure you speak in there.
I'm sorry. On the note of books, Dale, just I'm so grateful that you wrote Reset. It's blowing me away. My wife has been bugging me to read it. I'm a voracious reader, so I'm engrossed in another book called Bipolar General, which is a fascinating read. But I broke down to start reading yours, and now I have a problem, which will I continue reading first. But right, I just finished my first book, and I'm in awe of publishers like yourself that write numerous books, authors, because it took me 2 years and I'm utterly exhausted. But anyway, so thank you for writing Reset. I know that that's just a thank you on the book theme, not the marriage theme.
You're welcome.
All right. Great comment. Yeah.
I wonder what your thoughts are with respect to quiet time and devotion time. Is that something you do alone? Is this something you do together, or both?
That's a very good question. Do you want to take that, or you want me to start? Okay. Marcia's a processor, if you haven't figured that out, all right, which I love about her, and I'm so thankful for her. And I tend to just process very quickly, and sometimes that gets me in trouble. But anyway, so when we were younger, okay, I would read books that would talk about how, as couples, you need to read the Bible together, you need to pray together, and we are so different in how we process things that it was challenging to do that. And then all of a sudden, I heard some people that just, godly people, older pastors and that are well known, say, my spouse and I, we've tried it, it doesn't work for us. And all of a sudden I felt relief, all right? And I'm sure she felt some relief as well. And so I have my own quiet time every morning where I'm in the Word and I'm in prayer, spending time with God. And then I'll let Marcia speak to her own end of it. But then we do come together and share what God's saying in our lives and what we're hearing. And, before we came here today, we prayed together. So we do have those times of prayer, but it's not like we do our devotions together.
He covered it pretty well. We enjoy most, I think, just sharing together what God has been speaking to us about, or what from the Word stuck out in our minds, and how God's speaking, or what do you think about this verse or whatever. We enjoy doing that together the most, I think, and have our own quiet time.
I think there's been times in our lives in crises when we will, spend more time together talking to God.
That's good. Somebody else? Yeah. Stephanie.
Marcia, I loved your example about replacing your negative thought, like intentionally, with the positive thought about the toilet. And just this morning, I heard somebody on the radio talking about a similar thing where her husband would leave the dishes in the sink, and she'd be frustrated, and she decided to time herself how long it took her to put them in the dishwasher, and it was 13 seconds. So she decided, instead of being frustrated, she would use 13 seconds to pray for her husband, which I thought was encouraging to me. Because to Dale's note, I was convicted earlier this month to spend 30 days praying for my husband and not saying anything negative to him or about him. And I would be rich if I'd put $20 in the jar every time I failed. But I think it's helpful, so I appreciate your practical examples of finding new habits, because life is like that, right? You need to practice, like you said, discipline. So thank you for sharing those real-life examples.
That's great.
Thanks, Stephanie. Somebody else who's got a question? Yeah.
Since you're not sharing the last two sections, what were the other two things you were going to cover with us?
Go ahead.
We were going to talk about forgiveness, giving and receiving forgiveness. That was the last one, wasn't it?
Why don't you,
That was the one.
actually, I think, why don't you tell them about the giving and receiving?
Oh, all right. He wants me to share. I was just going to talk about how there's so many things every week where we need to have grace with our spouse and forgiveness toward each other, you know, all the things that come up. But there's also major things that happen sometimes in marriages. And I just was going to share a story of two couples, nobody that lives around here, but their stories, because it is such a powerful illustration of what forgiveness and unforgiveness look like.
And these are couples close to us.
Yeah. And so in both of these couples, all four of them are followers of Christ. And in both situations, there was infidelity in the marriage. And the offending partner did repent and did everything they could to make things right with their spouse. They, went through counseling and all those kinds of things. But in one case, I'll talk about the first case, was the husband just really, really struggled with forgiveness. And you could tell by his behavior that he felt that his wife, that by not forgiving her, he was helping her pay for what she had done wrong. And but the sad thing is, his unforgiveness blinded him, that he was destroying. It's truly a self-destructive thing to be unforgiving. And it also damaged the kids. It's been very hard on them. But you could just see in his life, it went from anger to bitterness to isolation, and then to a serious drinking problem. And he can't, like I said, he's blinded by his unforgiveness. He can't see that he has 3 beautiful children and a wife who are waiting for him, that he could have a healthy family again. And just very painful to watch. But then in another situation, another couple, the husband had an affair, and when the wife found out, of course, at first she was devastated and so broken and hurt, of course, but it had been a rocky marriage, and so after that initial shock, her thought was, okay, now I have a reason to get out of this marriage. But as she prayed and sought the Lord, she felt the Lord telling her she needed to forgive her husband and give him another chance. And she was determined to forgive her husband as Christ had forgiven her. And it took time, and it was a painful process, and there were a lot of tears. But I can't tell you the beauty that God brought out. Not only did it transform her life, it transformed her husband's life. And they ended up with a stronger, healthier marriage than they had ever had before, because she chose to forgive. And the beauty of Christ just was so apparent in her life. It was just amazing to see. And it's just shows how God can take the ugliest of circumstances and through forgiveness bring out something really beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about this biblically, forgiveness always precedes repentance. And I think about the story of the prodigal son when he comes back. Before he can get a word out, what does his father do? He throws his arms around him, right? And then repentance can come so quickly. That's how Abba is. That's how our God is. And I think our capacity to forgive in our human relationships so depends on our relationship with God. And it so depends on how I see God. if I see God as a monster, if I see God as angry all the time, and a lot of us have been brought up in that kind of understanding of God, at least I was, then it's very hard for you yourself to be loving, and it's very hard for you yourself to be forgiving, because you never feel like God forgives you. You feel like you have to always be earning his forgiveness. And so perhaps that's one of the issues that one of the couples has, is the one who was offended, and his wife has repented repeatedly. I think the reason he is having such a hard time forgiving his spouse is because he does not understand what God has done for him. Because if you've really experienced God's forgiveness, you can't help but be a forgiver as well. It may not come easily, all right? As Marcia mentioned, the second couple, she had to discipline herself first to forgive. She wasn't a feeling issue, it was a knowledge issue. And knowledge trumps feelings, right? My people die for the lack of what? Feelings? No. They die for lack of faith? No. They die for lack of what? Knowledge. Knowledge breeds faith, which overcomes feelings. So I have to be willing, all right, to forgive. And I think the significance of what Marcia just shared with you is it starts by first of all, being able to forgive what I would call the little things, right? If you practice forgiving the little things, then when the hard things come, it's a bit easier to forgive. Not easy, but a bit easier. If you're a pound of flesh person, you left the toilet seat down, I'm going to make you suffer for the next 2 weeks by burning the oatmeal or whatever it is, right? If you're a pound of flesh person, God have mercy if you have a real crisis. Right? So forgiveness is like muscle work. You have to keep it warm. You have to keep it going in the relationship. Yes?
So good. All right, we have
There's
time
a
for
question
two.
here, Brian.
Yep, 2 more.
This is a little bit of a Pandora's box opening, but this is entitled Marriage Matters, and we all in this room, I believe that and everything. But we know the culture that we're living in now today, and as parents and aunts and uncles of younger generation, so much of the culture is same-sex, counterfeit marriage, or heterosexually just living together. As parents and loved ones in those situations of these younger adults, what do you say? How do you, because yes, we model all this, but what do you do? I mean, when they're going a different direction from how you've reared them biblically. Yeah.
You want to tackle that first? You hold my tea then, please. So our youngest son is walked away from the Lord and has lived a lifestyle that we don't approve of. He's not gay, but he's been active in other ways. And it breaks our heart. That's not how we raised him. It's not what we taught him. We have had to work on is on the one hand, holding to the truth, which we refuse to budge on, and he knows it. And on the other hand, continuously showing that we love him. And I have to accept the fact that though he may see that as incongruent, that if you really love me, you won't hold this truth out. He may feel that way, but I'm not going to let it bother me. I'm just, and I'll give you an example. He came, this is a while back, he had a gal they wanted to stay at our house, and they were living together, and I just said no. I said, if you want to stay here, you're welcome to, but you're not going to stay in the same room. So they stayed in a hotel. But he still came over, we had lunch, we had a great time, but he knew what the boundaries were. And then finally, he's so cheap, he said, okay, can I come home? I'll sleep somewhere else. All right? And it's like, okay, all right? And it's like I'm not going to cave. I'm going to hold my boundaries. I don't care what you call me, what you think of me. I'm actually doing this for your own good. I think what's hard is to do that and love. And what we have seen so many couples our age is they've caved on the truth. They've allowed emotions to take over. They convince themselves somehow that this is, that this lifestyle is acceptable. What happens though in a situation like that is now I'm really messing things up. because I'm saying I'll accept that lifestyle, let's say same-sex lifestyle. I'll embrace that. But if that same person were to commit adultery, you'd come unhinged. How could you be unfaithful to my daughter or my son? And it's like now you have these conflicting values that make no sense. Either you're all truth and you're all in, or you're not at all. I think the challenge, though, and like you said, it's a Pandora's box, is holding truth and loving at the same time, and not becoming bitter, angry, resentful, or on the other hand, totally compromised, etc. So, I mean, that's just a small little answer to your great question, Brian.
All right. Hey, let's thank Dale and Marcia for coming today. Fantastic job. We do love to give you a next step when you come to a Lunch and Learn. And one of the ministries that we talked about early on here is something called Reengage that is offered 2 times a year here at Wooddale. We've had about 100 couples now go through our Reengage program. Stephanie Teal is in the back. I'm going to have her stand or wave. Stand up, Stephanie. If you've got questions about Reengage, this Sunday at our Edina campus, Stephanie and her husband Jim are going to be at that campus doing a little intro to Reengage. And then here on this campus on January 7th, that Sunday, right in this room, we're going to have an introduction to Reengage for those who just might want to learn more about this ministry. The next time through Reengage is January 30th, and it's 14 weeks. And you're going to cover topics like we talked about this week, like the Robinsons talked about last week. And I promise you, your marriage is going to be in a better spot at the end of those 14 weeks if you'll commit to doing the work. And so if you've got a great marriage and you want it to be better, this is a great ministry for you. It's not just for marriages that are in crisis. But if your marriage is in crisis, this is a place for you too, because there's hope and there's healing. And what they talked about right at the end there on forgiveness, I think that resonated with many in the room. When we choose not to forgive, the person that destroys is us. It's not the person who offended us or hurt us. It's destroying us. And we get to be pastors on call here at Wooddale. Today is one of my pastor on call days. And the first phone call I had today was with somebody who just can't forgive. And it's destroyed her. It's just destroyed her. And today she found freedom after about an hour on the phone and a new understanding of what forgiveness is all about. And for the first time in her life, understood what not forgiving was doing to her, and was able to maybe shift an attitude. When that happens in marriage, it's beautiful. Last thing I want to tell you is this week in Reengage, they're going to hear about the legacy that a godly marriage and a marriage that is the type of marriage that Dale and Marcia described today can leave for generations. We don't know what a marriage that is founded upon the principles of God and living under the right priorities will do for generations to come. But we do know that generations are impacted by those marriages. So my dad died a couple weeks ago, and many of you know that. And it was he was preparing an appetizer for Thanksgiving and had a brain aneurysm and didn't come out of it and passed away 2 days later on his 61st wedding anniversary. My parents had an amazing marriage. Like I was so blessed to watch my mom and dad as they walked with Jesus. And my brothers, I have 3 brothers. I'm the middle child in my family, and then I have a sister who was kind of the caboose surprise along the way. My brothers had gone over to my parents' apartment to pick up any bills or anything that needed to be paid, and it happened to be that later on in the day he passed away, and to get clothes for my mom. And while they were looking for clothes, they found a card that my dad had already prepared for my mom for her 61st wedding anniversary. And he never got out of the 1980s like print shop type program on the computer, so he had done happy 61st anniversary, and inside was their wedding picture. And then there was a verse that said, "He who finds a wife finds a good treasure." And he said, "B, you are my treasure, and I love you with all of my heart. Love, Gordon." And on the back was "Made especially for you" from Gordon with his little picture there, because that's how my dad did it. And he'd already signed it. He had to do that at least 2 days before his anniversary. If he did it the morning he died or had the brain aneurysm, maybe it was further than that. But even in his death, my dad taught us about the intentionality of what it means to be a husband who loves his wife. And my brothers and I were just saying, oh man, we all need to step it up, right? Because like we're going to Cub on the way home from work and our anniversary and getting the flowers in the card, and Dad's got it done days ahead of time. Like he just taught us that. But we also looked at the legacy of grandkids and kids and others who are following Jesus because of what they saw in Grandpa too. So that's our prayer for you, that you might have a marriage that impacts generations. And if you're in a spot where, because it doesn't matter, we've had couples who've been married for 6 months and couples who've been married for 58 years that have come through Reengage. Doesn't matter where you're at in that spectrum, there's always room to get a little bit better. Let me pray for you as you go. Father God, thank you for the couples who are here today. And God, thank you for the marriages that are represented. And no matter where we're at in that spectrum, if we need to have a complete resurrection in our marriage, if we need to reignite something, if we just need to reconnect as a couple, wherever it's at, Lord, we pray that you would help us this Christmas season to give our spouse the gift of a better marriage. And that we would be people who would just be servants to the wonderful gift that you've given us in our spouse. That we'd be quick to forgive. That would be people who would draw those boundaries that Dale talked about, Lord, and that we would know what those are and that we would stay within those in our marriage and not allow room for the enemy to engage. Lord, that we would just make such a commitment to date time together. Thanks for a pastor and a wife who demonstrate that they're going to now get out of here and go on their date together, and that's still a priority for them in 44 years of marriage. And may that always be so. God, we thank you for the person that's next to us, if they're our spouse today. And if not, Lord, for the gift to that person who's there. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in January at our next Lunch and Learn.